There is a particular kind of sting that arrives the instant someone disrespects you, a dismissive comment, a public correction, a tone that makes clear exactly how little consideration you were given in that moment. And almost as quickly as the sting appears, so does the old reflex, the urge to explain yourself, to prove them wrong, to somehow win back a respect that was just visibly withdrawn in front of you. Why does disrespect so reliably trigger an immediate need to respond, rather than a moment of simple, steady pause? Why does the instinct to defend yourself so often make the situation worse rather than better? Before we explore this together, subscribe to this channel, where we uncover the hidden psychology behind everyday life. Picture a lantern, its flame perfectly steady, suddenly exposed to a gust of wind. The instinctive reaction might be to fight the wind directly, waving the lantern wildly to keep the flame alive. But a flame handled this way often goes out faster, not slower. The steadier response, the one requiring far more discipline, is simply to shield it quietly and let the gust pass. Is stillness in that moment weakness? Or is it the only thing actually capable of protecting what matters? Carl Jung believed that our most immediate emotional reactions often originate not from the present moment itself, but from older, unexamined material stored in the shadow, old wounds, old fears, old questions about our own worth, triggered instantly by anything resembling disrespect. What if the thing you must never do when someone disrespects you is not about controlling your outward behavior at all, but about recognizing which part of you is actually being triggered in that moment? Here is the warning worth naming plainly. Never respond to disrespect from the wounded place inside you that is desperate to be understood. That part of you, however understandable its ache, will never produce the outcome it's actually seeking. It will only escalate the moment. Hand your composure to someone who has already shown they do not value it, and leave you, afterward, feeling smaller rather than more secure. Why does responding from that wounded place so consistently fail? Because disrespect activates something deeper than the immediate insult itself. It activates an old, private fear that you are not, in fact, worthy of basic consideration. And when that fear is driving your response, you are no longer defending your dignity in the present moment. You are relitigating every past moment your dignity went unacknowledged, all at once, through a single reaction that the current situation was never actually large enough to hold. Consider how this typically unfolds. Someone speaks to you dismissively, and instead of a calm, measured response, an entire flood of justification pours out explaining your credentials, your effort, your good intentions, as though sufficient evidence might finally convince this particular person of your worth. Does this ever actually work? Rarely, because the disrespect, more often than not, was never actually about the facts you're so quickly assembling to correct it. Alfred Adler believed that disrespect frequently says more about the person delivering it than about the person receiving it, an expression of their own private insecurity, their own need to establish superiority, projected outward onto whoever happens to be within reach. Jung might have added that this dynamic often triggers a shadow reaction in you as well, an old wound meeting an outside provocation and mistaking the resulting intensity for proof that something must urgently be defended. And here is the harder question worth sitting with honestly. Whose voice are you actually trying to satisfy when you rush to defend yourself against disrespect? The person in front of you, or someone much older, much further back, whose approval you have been quietly chasing for far longer than you may realize. Picture the tree standing bare through winter, appearing from a distance like something finished, without depth. Beneath the surface, unseen, the roots continue their patient widening in the dark. Is restraint in the face of disrespect truly a form of passivity? Or is it simply the visible surface of something steadier growing beneath the noise of an old wound finally being witnessed, rather than reactively defended? This is the turn worth making gently here. Learning to withhold your immediate reaction to disrespect is not weakness. And it is not the same as accepting the disrespect as valid. It may in fact be one of the clearest signs of something Jung called individuation, a self secure enough in its own worth that it no longer requires winning every provocation in order to remain intact. Individuation, in this particular moment, rarely feels satisfying in real time. It tends to feel, initially, like restraint mistaken for surrender. Only later does it begin to feel like the steadiest kind of strength available to a person. So, how do you actually practice this in the exact moment disrespect occurs? This is where the observer becomes essential, the quiet witness inside you, capable of noticing the sting rising and the old wound beneath it stirring, before either one takes over your response entirely. Not the part of you that reacts instantly, defending itself before it has even had time to understand what's actually happening internally. The part that can simply notice, calmly, I feel disrespected right now, and something old in me wants to prove its worth immediately. I do not have to let it drive this moment. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that the true measure of a person is not how they behave when treated well, but how steadily they hold themselves when treated poorly. Can you feel the pull to defend yourself rising? And pause there, choosing a measured response instead of an immediate, wounded one. Can you separate the present provocation from the older ache it happened to touch? And here is something worth noticing. If you look honestly, this particular reaction, the rush to defend yourself the moment disrespect occurs, has likely repeated itself across many relationships, many years, wearing different faces but following the same familiar shape. Why does life seem to place you, again and again, in situations that test whether your composure depends on someone else's behavior, until the pattern is finally recognized and, eventually, released? Jung believed that whatever remains unconscious in us tends to reappear in our lives as pattern, the same wounded reflex, surfacing in new provocations that closely resemble the emotional shape of older, unresolved ones. Perhaps this is not really about the specific disrespect you encountered today. Perhaps it is the newest version of an older question. When did you first learn that your worth required immediate defending, and are you finally ready to discover that it doesn't? Viktor Frankl believed that between what happens to a person and how they respond, a space exists narrow, but entirely their own. You cannot control whether someone chooses to disrespect you, but the space between that moment and your response to it, whether reactive or steady, wounded or composed, that space belongs entirely to you. So what does responding wisely to disrespect actually look like in practice? Not something dramatic, not a single perfect comeback that resolves the moment triumphantly. It might look like pausing before responding at all, allowing the sting to pass through you rather than immediately out of you. It might look like offering a brief, measured response and choosing not to elaborate further even when the urge to explain yourself remains strong. It might look like walking away from a conversation that has stopped being productive, without needing the last word to feel secure in your own worth. It might look like recognizing, quietly, that the disrespect likely says far more about the person delivering it than about anything true regarding you. None of this arrives with fanfare. Jung once suggested that people will do almost anything to avoid facing the old wound beneath a present provocation, and if that is true, then simply pausing long enough to notice that wound, rather than reacting from it immediately, may already be a significant act of quiet strength. Return, for a moment, to the lantern, its flame exposed suddenly to an unexpected gust. Imagine shielding it now, not through wild defensive motion, but through simple, steady stillness, trusting that the flame does not need to fight the wind directly in order to survive it. Does that make the flame passive? Or does it simply mean the flame understands, finally, exactly what kind of strength actually protects it? And so we return to the question beneath this entire warning, beneath every reflexive defense, every wounded justification offered to someone who was never actually going to be moved by it. What actually remains of you? once your composure no longer depends on someone else's respect being immediately, visibly restored? What remains when your worth no longer requires defending in the very moment someone else fails to acknowledge it? Jung offered an answer that has outlasted him by nearly a century. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Perhaps the moment someone disrespects you was never actually a test of how well you could defend yourself. Perhaps it was simply an invitation to discover how steady you had already become, long before that particular gust of wind ever arrived. If this resonated, subscribe to this channel and join us as we keep uncovering these hidden truths. What is one moment you responded to disrespect with steadiness instead of a wounded reaction? Write it in the comments below, and let that lantern, wherever it burns in you, finally hold its flame through the next gust without needing to fight it directly.